Section 533, none of the funds appropriated.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Madam Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Moran of Virginia, and Section 533, amend paragraph 2 to read as follows. 2, as transferred to the United States Naval Station, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, by the Department of Defense after December 31st, 2005.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I reserve a point of order on the gentleman's
A point of
amendment.
order is reserved. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Section 533 would prohibit any funds being used for the transfer, release, or assistance in the transfer or release of any Guantanamo detainee housed in Cuba on or after June of 2009. My amendment would change that date to December 31st, 2005. Now, in 2006, people who were truly the worst of the worst, those detainees who were housed in CIA black sites, were transferred to Guantanamo. Now, prior to 2006, Guantanamo was populated with detainees who were simply not as deserving of indefinite detention as this latter group, in my view, is. 86% of the people of the first group, prior to 2005, were arrested in exchange for a bounty. The vast majority never committed an act of violence against the United States or any of its allies. About 5% may have been affiliated with Al-Qaeda. Now, Madam Chairwoman, it seems to me that it's time that we clarified the definition of who is at Guantanamo. I listened very closely to my good friends yesterday, including Mr. Wolf, who cited Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in defining who is at Guantanamo. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is one of those worst of the worst. I don't care what you do to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. As far as I'm concerned, from everything I know, he deserves whatever happens to him. But we're not talking about him if this amendment were to pass. We're talking about people who were brought there initially. More than half were already released of the 779 by the Bush administration. 86 more have been already cleared for release. Now, Madam Chairwoman, fact is we're spending $150 million a year to house these folks. About 150 of them are people that were brought there before 2005. And we've authorized up to $500 million to be spent to further modernize the facilities so that we can keep them indefinitely. It's expensive. We're spending $1 million per detainee now, and then we would be talking, if we spent that $500 million more, for indefinite detention. And the problem with that, in addition to the money, is the national security issue. Because Guantanamo is a recruiting tool and a rallying cry for the enemy. It's not the only thing they cite, but invariably it's one of the principal things they cite. And why the United States is not the country that it truly is. They suggest that we are not good to our word, that we don't believe in the very principles of our jurisprudence system, that people are innocent until they've been proven guilty, that they ought to be charged with crimes, that we don't believe in indefinite detention. That's what other countries do. We don't do that. We give people a fair trial. But the reason we have Guantanamo is that this was set up to be above the law. It's extrajudicial. The rules don't apply. And the rest of the world looks at this, and it undermines our credibility and our security as a nation. That, Madam Chairwoman, is exactly why we should distinguish. The worst of the worst, keep them there. Keep them in some kind of isolated structure. But you sure don't have to spend $500 million for 12 to 15 people. But those other 150, of whom many of them are now on a hunger strike, the majority are on a hunger strike because they believe there's no hope. There's nothing to live for. They're going to be there forever. And in fact, more than 30 of them, 37 to be exact, are being forcibly tube-fed. This was in another nation. We'd be on the floor. Mr. Wolf would be on the floor objecting to
The gentleman's time
That's why this
has
amendment
expired.
should pass, Madam
For
Chairwoman.
purpose, does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I rise to withdraw my point of order and rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized. The reservation is withdrawn, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise in opposition to the amendment simply because I don't know the impact of security, on security of this amendment. Who would be released? Where would these prisoners be relocated? And where would they be released to? To Yemen? To the United States? I simply don't know by reading this amendment. It's clear that if these individuals were released to Yemen, they would not likely remain in custody for very long and would likely rejoin the fight. At the outset of the President's first term, an executive order declared the intention to close Guantanamo Bay and bring the detainees to the United States. That proposal was rejected by this Congress, and prohibitions on transferring detainees to the U.S. were enacted by overwhelming bipartisan majorities. As my colleague and friend, Mr. Wolf, just discussed yesterday during consideration of the Milcon bill, this amendment could result in very dangerous outcomes. 779 people were detained in the first few years, and at this time it is unknown how many could potentially be released as an effect of this amendment. As you know, several men who have been released from Guantanamo have gone back into the battlefield and killed Americans. We also know that having these dangerous individuals detained and tried in the United States dramatically impacts the facilities and localities where they're located. You must remember that the violent nature of some of these individuals and the social impact on having these people in our neighborhoods. I simply cannot support this amendment. It has a high monetary and social costs and could potentially endanger our communities. In fact, a few years ago, it was discussed about releasing some of these detainees, 5 up in New York City, and that was rejected very, very strongly by both Republicans and Democrats. Any proposal that results in these detainees being sent to the United States is simply the wrong policy. I urge my colleagues to reject the gentleman's amendment, and I yield back at this time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Madam Chairman, I ask to strike the last words.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairman, I rise in support of my colleague Mr. Moran's amendment. The fact is that Section 533 of this bill, which his amendment amends, that section has no place in this bill in the first place. This simply doesn't belong in the Homeland Security bill. If it belongs in any bill, it would be the Commerce Justice bill. But as a political gesture for years now, we've had this amendment or something very much like it added to a number of appropriations bills. What Mr. Moran has done tonight, though, is interesting. He has not proposed that the section be removed. He has simply amended it. He's amended it, I think, in a sensible way. He would limit the prohibition of the transfer of detainees to those demonstrably dangerous people who were transferred after 2005. And that should remove most of the objections people have made to the elimination of this prohibition entirely. It seems that the people who have pushed, the colleagues who have pushed this amendment year after year and bill after bill, they don't apparently have very strong concerns about indefinite detention and the kind of stain that this represents on this country. They also seem to think that when detainees are going to be brought to trial, that the way to do it is military commissions at Guantanamo. Seem to think that's the only possible form of justice for these detainees. Well, the reality is that military commissions have a very spotty record at best, while our criminal courts have a long and successful record of prosecuting terrorists. Why would we want to eliminate that option? Why would we want to deny that option to the president? I think the reasoning of the proponents of this provision both denigrates our judicial system and actually exalts these detainees to a status they don't deserve in the eyes of the world. So if I had my way, this section would not be in the bill in the first place. But since it is, I think our colleague has made a very sensible proposal that we should consider very favorably. And I hope that colleagues will do just that. And I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Strike the requisite number
The
of
gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise in opposition to the amendment. And I want to, again, to begin, I don't believe it's fair to say that had we closed down Guantanamo Bay, bin Laden would not have done what he had done. Bin Laden was active and al-Qaeda was active in a 1993 bombing at the World Trade Center. That was before the Guantanamo Bay. They were involved in the bombing of the American Embassy in Tanzania and Nairobi. That was before. And I don't believe that al-Qaeda and al-Shabaab and all these are waiting to see, well, when President Obama closes down Guantanamo Bay, we're going to kind of get off the field. It's going to be over. And I just don't think that has any impact. Secondly, the transferees, according to a political article, FBI Director Robert Mueller stated to transfer detainees to local jails could affect or infect other prisoners or have the capability of affecting events outside the prison system. I agree with Director Mueller. I think Director Mueller has done a great job. On the Misali case, if the gentleman remembers, Misali was in Alexandria for 4 years, and it tied up Alexandria. And to bring some of these people and to try them here creates a lot of problems. The other issue, though, 15% at least, and this is an old figure, it could be higher, it could be a little bit lower, but at least 15% of the terrorist and recidivism rate of released detainees that were released back to Yemen and places like that. It is not unheard of to have, as you release some, and some were released under the Bush administration, went back on the field and killed our men and women. And so to release these, certainly you would never do this in an appropriation bill. You would have extensive hearings in and out. You would call the FBI, ask what the ramifications is. You would call the CIA to ask them what the ramifications. You would ask Homeland Security to ask what the ramifications. So for all these issues, and I won't take up any more time because we covered it last night, I think this is a bad amendment, and I urge its defeat. And yield back the balance.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Madam Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think this is a very important debate. I remind my colleague from Virginia that I was on the Board of Supervisors in Fairfax County during the Karzai trial, and most certainly it was a difficult time, but we handled professionally that trial. He was tried fairly, convicted, and executed in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It is not beyond our reach to be able to handle these difficult cases. Madam Chairman, I believe that this is a very important debate. I believe the author needs to be heard in the exposition of this argument, and I'm pleased now to yield to Mr. Moran of Virginia.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I thank my very good friend from Virginia. And I would like to address a few points that my other very good friend from Virginia made. First of all, with regard to the Missouri case that was tried in Alexandria.
Ben?
Yes, I need to address the chairwoman.
The gentleman from Virginia
Needs to stand.
Needs to
Yes.
remain on his feet.
Thank you
The
very
gentleman
much,
is
Madam Chairwoman.
continued.
Madam Chairwoman, The case that my good friend from Virginia referred to is actually a case in point. As Mr. Connolly pointed out, the American jurisprudence system worked. He was tried, and he was convicted, and he was executed. And in fact, no convictions have been achieved with these military commissions. 2 guilty verdicts, but they were overturned.
Would the gentleman yield one?
The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, controls
Would the gentleman
time.
yield? If it would, Miss Sally was picked up here in the United States.
If the gentleman would suspend, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, controls the time.
If the gentleman
and
would yield,
be able to
I would yield to my friend from
Okay,
Virginia.
Miss
The
Sally
gentleman
was
is
picked
recognized.
up here in the United States. He was not picked up on the battlefield in Afghanistan or someplace like that. So they were totally separate type issues.
Well,
I
if
yield
they
back.
were-
Thank you, gentlemen, for.
I would say the gentleman, if they were totally separate, then I don't know why he brought that issue into this debate, if they were totally separate. The fact is, there is a lesson, and I want to explain what that lesson is, because our American jurisprudence system worked. He was convicted in a U.S. court. And in fact, before he was executed, there was a description of this person. I don't want to call him a gentleman. He was crying uncontrollably. And apparently the reason was that all the conceptions that he had proved to be misconceptions. He had been screaming about how bad the United States was, how unfair the trial was. And then he realized he was wrong. Now, it's too late for him to realize that, but the American jurisprudence system worked. And in fact, we have tried more than 1,000 terrorists in the United States. We are currently holding 373 people convicted of terrorism in 98 facilities across the country. There are 6 Department of Defense facilities where detainees could be held in the United States, and they're only at 48% capacity. There are 98 Justice Department facilities, as the gentleman well knows, and one is in Alexandria, where Guantanamo detainees could be held in the United States. I just want to show the rest of the world that our justice system works, that it's what defines us as a nation and as a people. Guantanamo doesn't define us. It's just the opposite of what we believe in, what we profess to believe in. That's the problem. Now, nobody suggested that 9/11 happened because of Guantanamo. We know our history. We know when Guantanamo was established. But the fact is, and we could cite any number of situations where our enemy cites Guantanamo as a reason for these young, impressionable men to join the forces of Al-Qaeda, because they want to suggest that we really are not who we say we are. This amendment would let us be who we are. Let the president close this facility that never should have been established in the first place. The Bush administration recognized that when it released more than half of the detainees, 779 of them, turned in for bounties in Afghanistan and Pakistan. That's not the way we arrest people. They release them. And the majority of the people at Guantanamo today, they've been cleared for release. They ought to be released, or they ought to be tried. And as far as the worst of the worst, do what you want with them. But you don't have to spend $500 million to upgrade the facilities at Guantanamo so that you can house people indefinitely.
The gentleman's
That's not
time.
who we are. That's why this amendment should pass.
Mr. Connolly's
Thank you,
time
Madam
has
Chairwoman.
expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Madam Chairwoman,
The agreement is not agreed to. The gentleman is recognized.
I would request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote having been requested pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on